Hello, I'm here with Dr. Matthew Anderson, who's been a counselor for over 40 years. I've had the opportunity to work for Dr. Anderson as his assistant years ago and remembered that he shared with me an experience he had had with his clients who were little people. And I then was prompted to ask him to do this interview for me to share with you for my project this week. So, Dr. Anderson, would you mind sharing your story?
No, thank you. I'm glad I can help out with the master's program. I call this briefly, I just want to tell the story and then we can talk more about maybe what I learned about it. But this took place in the early 1980s in Southern California when I had a practice there. And I worked a lot with single people who were dealing with relationships, wanted relationships, and I got a call one day from a woman who had a very strong voice. It sounded very self-confident. I would even say a kind of a big voice. And she said to me, do you work with people who are single and looking for relationships? And I said, sure, I do that a lot. And she said, well, I want to make an appointment. And I think she already knew about me from someone that I had worked with before. Mm-hmm. And she told me her name was Ronnie. And so she made an appointment for the following week. And the week came, the time for her appointment arrived. Mm-hmm. There was a knock on the door, and I opened the door. And I had two responses. I had my external response to her. I said, hi, but on the inside, I went, holy cow, what am I going to do about this? Because Ronnie was 3 feet 8 inches tall. Mm-hmm. And as she walked in the door, I thought, I don't know what I'm going to do. It's rare for me not to be able to talk, but
yes,
I was almost stopped in my tracks. And so Ronnie came in and sat down on the couch, and first thing I said to her was, listen, you have to know this is true, but I'll just say it out loud. I've never worked with anybody who had your life experience. Never, not once. I'm willing to work with you if you feel comfortable with me, but you're going to have to do a very good education to me of what it's been like to have your life experience. Mm-hmm. And she said, of course, because I think, as you study this group, you've probably already done a lot of study of it, but this is a very small group of people. And so Ronnie and I began a relationship. We worked once a week for, I guess, in total, maybe a year and a half. Mm. And she told me about what her life experience was like and where she grew up. Ronnie happened to be an Israeli. She was born in Israel and grew up there. Mm-hmm. And then came to the States. And Ronnie had been married before. She had a child, a little girl, who was also a little person. And she wanted a relationship, and she didn't care if that person was what we would call normal size or a little person. She wanted someone to love her and someone to love. And so we talked about that. The truth is, in the back of my mind through all of this, I was constantly saying to myself, I don't know how this is going to work, because she has a great disadvantage. That's the way I thought about it. But she was very open with me, and just a person, it's I guess paradoxical. I wanted to say ironic, but I think paradoxical is the right word. She had a big personality. Mm-hmm. So, to go right to the end of the story, and then I'll back up a little bit, but the end of the story is about a little more than a year later from our first meeting, Ronnie fell in love. And this always kind of gets to me. And she got married. And his name was Larry. And Larry was 6 feet 2 inches tall. he loved her deeply. I saw them together. I talked to them. He came in with her. He loved Ronnie deeply. I mean, it was like, it was real love. And eventually they had another child. And there's a 50-50 chance when a regular normal person has a baby with a little person, that it could be a normal size or it could be a little person. This turned out to be another little person. I remember once before they got married, but after they started getting very serious about each other, I went to a party one night, and it was, I don't know, 50 or 60 people there, and I walked in the front door, and I knew that Ronnie was there because I could hear her voice. And I walked over into the corner of the room where she was sitting on the couch. She was actually sitting in Larry's lap, and she had the 12 or 15 people sitting around her, laughing their heads off. She was telling outrageous stories about their sex life.
Oh.
It was hysterical. I won't include that part on this video.
Yes, let's keep it
But
PG.
she just had an enormously beautiful aura about her. And
Zest for life.
it was beautiful. And they
That's
got
nice.
married, and they had a child. I found out I moved out of that area a few years later, but then I knew from someone else who knew her, maybe about 8 or 9 years later, that Ronnie died. And the sad part I learned about being a little person is, particularly if you have a disproportionate part of dwarfism, is that the organs don't work properly in the body, and eventually it's rare that a little person will live past 50 years old, is what Ronnie told me. So she was in her middle to late 30s, I guess, when I first met her, maybe late 30s. But she was an incredibly wonderful person. And I know that there are lessons about little people that I learned from her sharing with me, but the first lesson that I learned personally is I realized from that experience that I should never, ever doubt that there is not someone for everyone who wants one. That's the way I came to think about it. It was my own prejudice, it was my own limited thinking, my own short-sightedness that made me look at her that first day and say, how am I going to help her have a relationship? She has such a disadvantage. She didn't have a disadvantage. Her stature was not her disadvantage in life. And she had a beautiful relationship with Larry.
She didn't let it become.
It didn't, and it wasn't in the way for him. Obviously,
Right.
it wasn't. And he was a big guy.
Right.
And they had a lovely relationship, and it really came to be the memory of her is it's kind of an honor to me to be able to share that story with you, because she touched me so deeply. And here I am, that was over 30 years ago
Right.
that I met her.
Right. Now, I hear a lot of positive things coming from you about her, that she left such an impression with you. But I was wondering if she shared any of her challenges in life
Oh, enormously.
with you.
The first thing she told me was it was extra difficult growing up in Israel. She said that in the Israeli culture, in her experience, that imperfection in bodies is not acceptable. I since read a little bit about that, and I discovered that as science has developed and people have discovered that how to tell how the baby is going to be, that at least in Israel they're very quick to pull the trigger on abortion in that case. But when she was small and born, maybe it wasn't the same. But the thing that struck me the most was she talked about anger. She told me that was the major emotion that little people have to struggle with, because life is hard. People are difficult to be around. People treat them like freaks. There's literally the looking down, but there's also the emotional, who is that, what kind of person? And I think that you told me when you were telling me a little bit about some of your research that dwarfism occurs in something like 1 in 10,000 to, I know that you said there are different statistics, but 1 in 10,000 to like 1 in 40,000 births. That makes for a minority that is incredibly small, but impossible to hide. And it must be very difficult, as Ronnie said to me, when she first came in. She knew I probably had no experience with people like her. That was expected. And she had had very little experience with people like her because 1 in 10,000, 1 in 20,000, 1 in 30,000, it's far less than 1% of the population in any country.
And did she belong to any groups? Or?
Not that I knew of. She didn't belong to any groups that I knew of. I know that at some point, and I'm sure you find it in your research, they've started groups.
Association.
But
she
it
wasn't
was
a part of it.
so that she had to deal with a lot of anger. She had to deal with a lot of simply physically hard to get around because so many things were not built for her.
Right.
Even sitting on my couch was not so comfortable for her because she, I'm sitting on
the floor.
I'm sitting on the couch right now. My feet, your feet are touching the ground.
Right.
Hers wouldn't.
Right.
Right. And there's a great deal of prejudice and misunderstanding. People want to use the wrong words.
Yes.
She taught me that little people was the preferred phrase or term. I didn't know when I met her that the M word, as they call it, or the word midget, is not supposed to be used. I was completely naive to the subject. She told me about growing up. She told me about making friends, the difficulties about that, how people will stare and sometimes ask rude questions. I think it takes a lot of courage to live, to grow up and live in that kind of life situation.
And if you don't mind me asking, did you work on certain aspects of how she managed all of that anger or kind of answering or responses to people who did that to her?
I dealt with her about that the way I would deal with anybody who told me they had a lot of anger. I asked her a lot of questions about it. I made it acceptable, I think, to express it to me. I let her know that if she had anything negative to say about the normal people, that I wasn't going to take it personally. I wasn't there to make judgments or to defend anybody. But she helped me to adjust my sight so that I could see life at least a little bit more through her eyes. She talked to me about the difficulties her family had in accepting it.
Now, was she the only one in her family with this particular issue? Okay.
And I don't know if there might be research that's about out there now, but I don't know how it seems to occur across the board in all races and all countries. And I don't know if it's really clear yet what the real source of it. I guess we'll find it in the DNA research at some point.
It's genetic, yes. It's genetic. And is it 50% or 25%? Is it a recessive gene? That's still in the works.
You know this?
No.
Oh.
I'm going to research
Oh.
it, and then I'm
I
going
thought you
to
were
write
asking
it.
me. I was hoping you weren't asking
I'm going to write it in my paper,
Oh.
so they'll have to wait.
It's going in the paper.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
All right.
So,
Is there anything else you could say
since
about
that point, and as you said in the beginning, I've been doing this a long time, and I've seen lots and lots of people. She remains the only little person who's ever walked through my door and said, I want to do some work. So I don't think that's strange. I think percentage-wise, in a certain sense, it was a gift to me that I had that opportunity. And when you mentioned that you were going to do something